Take me as yours and I'll call you daddy." The giant widow smirked at the shy cowboy. The saloon's paint was peeling, the general store's sign creaked with the wind, and the few townsfolk moved about with the kind of sleepy calm that only a place untouched by time could hold. Yet Dustwood had its charm. The wide-open skies, the rolling hills beyond, and the distant mountains gave it a peaceful, almost magical feeling. At the edge of the town, a large ranch spread across the land like a small kingdom. It belonged to a woman known as the Widow Marlowe. She was tall, strong, and carried herself with the kind of confidence that made people stop and look. Since her husband's passing a year ago, she had managed the ranch alone, tending to cattle, repairing fences, and keeping the farm running. Her presence was commanding, yet there was a softness in her eyes when she looked at the animals or the small, scruffy children of Dustwood who occasionally visited the ranch. On this particular morning, the widow was inspecting the barn, her boots sinking slightly into the soft earth. She ran her hands over the wooden beams and the worn leather of the saddles, checking every corner with the precision of someone who knew this land better than anyone else. The animals were restless, sensing the change in the air. The horses snorted and stamped their hooves, and the cows lowed softly in the distance. The widow moved among them with ease, whispering soothing words that seemed to calm even the most anxious creatures. Meanwhile, a young man had arrived in Dustwood the day before. His name was Jacob, but everyone in town simply called him the cowboy, for his quiet, humble way of working with horses and cattle. Jacob was shy, reserved, and careful not to draw too much attention to himself. He had a gentle strength, a quiet confidence that spoke louder than words ever could. He had come to Dustwood in search of work, carrying only a small bag and a tired look in his eyes, the kind that came from long journeys under the sun. Jacob wandered into town in the early morning, hoping to find the general store open. He pushed the door slowly and was greeted by the smell of fresh bread and dried herbs. The store was small but well stocked, with barrels of flour, sacks of sugar, and shelves of jars filled with pickles and preserves. Behind the counter stood Mrs. Harlow, the owner, who gave him a polite nod. "Morning, young man. You new in Dustwood?" she asked. "Yes, ma'am," Jacob replied softly. His voice was quiet, almost hesitant, but there was a sincerity in it that made Mrs. Harlow smile. "Well, you'll find work if you keep your eyes open. The Marlowe ranch is always in need of hands," she said, glancing toward the back door, where the widow's ranch was visible through the dusty windows. Jacob nodded, unsure of what to say. He had heard of the widow Marlowe, of course. Everyone in town had. She was known not just for her size and strength, but for her sharp mind and even sharper tongue. People spoke of her with a mix of respect and curiosity. But Jacob was more focused on finding a place where he could belong, where he could work honestly and quietly without drawing attention to himself. Just as he stepped outside, the widow herself appeared in the distance. She was riding her horse with ease, her posture straight, her eyes scanning the horizon. Her hair, a rich chestnut color, was tied back neatly, and her clothes, though simple, fit her perfectly, emphasizing her tall, strong frame. Jacob watched as she approached, noticing the way her presence seemed to fill the space around her. He felt a mixture of awe and nervousness, unsure of how to even greet her. When she reached the edge of the town, she stopped and looked directly at him. A small smirk appeared on her face, playful yet confident. Jacob's heart skipped a beat. He wasn't used to such attention, especially from someone as formidable as the widow Marlowe. "You must be new here," she said, her voice firm but not unkind. "Yes, ma'am," Jacob replied again, trying to steady himself. "I'm looking for work." "You don't seem like the type to shy away from hard work." For the rest of the morning, Jacob wandered around Dustwood, observing the town and its people. He noticed how everyone had a rhythm, a routine that had been in place for years. Children played near the dusty streets, shopkeepers swept the sidewalks, and the townsfolk exchanged polite greetings with a nod or a smile. Yet Jacob's thoughts kept returning to the widow Marlowe and her smirk, the way she carried herself, the quiet strength she exuded. By midday, Jacob made his way to the ranch. The widow was already at work, tending to the fences and inspecting the cattle. She looked up as he approached, her eyes narrowing slightly as if evaluating him once more. "You made it," she said, her voice carrying a mix of amusement and authority. "We'll see if you can keep up." At first he felt awkward under her watchful gaze, but gradually he found a rhythm. He noticed how she moved with purpose, how she handled the cattle with ease, and how her eyes missed nothing. There was a quiet intensity about her that was both intimidating and inspiring. As the hours passed, the widow occasionally offered small comments, teasing him gently. "Don't pull that so hard you might snap it. Careful now." Jacob would nod, trying not to blush under her attention. Despite her firm words, there was a playful undertone, a hint of warmth that made the work feel less daunting. By the time the sun began to dip toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the ranch, Jacob had finished the repairs. He was tired, covered in dust and sweat, but there was a quiet sense of pride in his work. The widow observed him for a moment, then nodded approvingly. "You did well for your first day," she said. "Most men can't keep up with this work, but you seem steady. Maybe you're not as shy as you look." He didn't know what the future held, but he knew one thing: he wanted to be here, working beside the widow, learning from her, and somehow, quietly becoming a part of her world. As the sun set over Dustwood, the ranch settled into a calm quiet. The cattle moved slowly toward their pens, the horses nickered softly, and the wind rustled through the tall grass. Jacob and the widow stood together for a moment, watching the sky turn shades of pink and orange. In that moment, an unspoken understanding passed between them, a promise of new beginnings, of challenges to face together, and perhaps of something deeper that neither of them yet fully understood. The widow smirked again, just slightly, and Jacob felt a flutter of something unfamiliar and exciting. It was the beginning of a connection neither of them could ignore, a bond that would grow in the days to come. And so, in the quiet town of Dustwood, under the wide-open skies, a shy cowboy and a giant widow took the first steps toward a story that neither of them would forget. The next morning, the ranch woke up to the sound of birds singing and the faint rumble of the wind across the open fields. The widow Marlowe was already up, moving with her usual energy. She had long since abandoned the idea of sleeping in late, finding comfort and purpose in the work that kept her late husband's legacy alive. The barn smelled faintly of hay and leather, and the soft neighing of horses echoed through the quiet ranch. Jacob had arrived early as well. The shy cowboy had a simple routine. He fed the animals, checked the fences, and quietly observed the way the widow managed everything. He had grown used to her presence now, though the way she carried herself still made him feel a little nervous. She was larger than most women, with broad shoulders and strong hands, yet her movements were graceful. The way she commanded the ranch, and yet seemed so connected to it, fascinated him. "Morning," Jacob said softly, tipping his hat as he approached the widow, who was already on horseback, inspecting the cattle near the far pasture. "Morning," she replied without turning, her eyes scanning the horizon. After a moment she glanced at him and smirked. "You're up early. Don't tell me you're going soft, cowboy." "It's not just about showing up, it's about paying attention. Out here, a small mistake can cost a lot." "Watch the horses," she instructed as she led him toward the stable. "They're not just animals, they know when you're nervous. They feel it. If you want them to trust you, you have to be steady, calm, and confident." He followed the widow's instructions carefully, talking softly, moving deliberately, and noticing every detail she had pointed out. "You're learning fast," she said, her voice a mixture of surprise and approval. "Most people can't even get a horse to calm down in their first week. You might be more capable than you realize." He wasn't used to such compliments, especially from someone as strong and confident as the widow. He worked alongside her through the morning, tending to the horses, checking the cattle, and helping with the milking. Each task was challenging in its own way, but he found a quiet satisfaction in the work. By midday, the sun was high, casting long shadows over the ranch. The widow led him to the orchard at the edge of the property. Here, the fruit trees grew in neat rows and the soil was carefully tended to. "These trees need care," she said, inspecting the branches. "You can't just let them grow wild. You prune them, you water them, you watch for pests. The same is true for people. You can't just expect them to thrive without guidance and attention." He watched her as she moved through the orchard, noticing the way she paused to inspect a branch, how her hands moved deftly, and how her eyes seemed to see everything at once. "You've done a good job so far," she said, looking at him with a smirk that suggested she enjoyed seeing him struggle a little. "But don't get too comfortable. Out here, comfort can be dangerous. Always stay alert." The widow asked him to help move some hay bales, repair a broken gate, and carry water to the farthest pastures. Each task was challenging, but Jacob worked steadily, proving that he was reliable and strong in his own quiet way. During a brief break, they sat under the shade of a large oak tree, sipping cool water from a shared bucket. The widow leaned back against the trunk, brushing a strand of hair from her face, and for a moment she seemed almost relaxed, almost vulnerable. "You work hard, cowboy," she said, her voice softer than usual. "Most people would have given up by now." "I like helping," he said simply. The widow smirked again, but there was warmth in her eyes this time. "Good. That's the kind of person I need around here. Someone steady, someone who doesn't panic when things get tough. You might just survive on this ranch after all." The air cooled slightly, and the golden light gave the fields a soft, glowing hue. Jacob felt a sense of pride in the work they had accomplished together. The widow's occasional teasing had become a kind of rhythm between them, a silent conversation that built trust and understanding. As they finished the day's tasks, the widow decided it was time to teach Jacob a lesson in patience. She led him to the river that ran along the edge of the property. The water was clear and cold, and the sound of it flowing over rocks was soothing. "Fishing," she said, handing him a rod. "It's not just about catching fish. It's about waiting, observing, and learning to be still. Patience is important, cowboy. It's important in work, in life, and in people. You know, most men don't last a week on this ranch. They give up when things get tough or when I push them a little." She smirked, looking at him with a teasing sparkle in her eyes. "You, however, you might surprise me yet. I like that about you, cowboy. You don't boast, you just do." The widow, for her part, found herself thinking about him more than she expected. There was something quiet and steady about Jacob, a strength that didn't need to shout to be noticed. He was respectful, hardworking, and kind, a rare combination in a world that often valued brashness over substance. That night, as the stars filled the sky and the ranch lay still under the gentle glow of the moon, Jacob sat outside the barn, reflecting on the day. He thought about the widow's smirk, her teasing, her strength, and her warmth. He realized that he was beginning to care for her in a way that was both exciting and terrifying. The widow, standing by the porch and watching the stars herself, felt something similar. There was a spark in Jacob that she hadn't expected, a gentle fire that made her heart beat a little faster. She smirked to herself, not entirely aware of why, but knowing that this shy cowboy might just become an important part of her life. And so, the days passed, each one bringing them closer. They worked together, laughed together, and slowly built a bond of trust and understanding. There were no grand gestures yet, no declarations of love, only quiet moments, shared work, and subtle glances that spoke volumes. In the small town of Dustwood, under the wide-open skies, a shy cowboy and a giant widow were beginning a story that would grow stronger with each passing day. Their connection was gentle, unspoken, and full of possibility, a promise of companionship, respect, and perhaps, in time, something more. The morning sun rose slowly over Dustwood, casting a warm golden light across the fields. The ranch was alive with movement, the horses neighing, the cows lowing, and the wind rustling through the tall grass. The widow Marlowe had already begun her day, checking fences, inspecting the barns, and ensuring that every part of the ranch ran smoothly. Her presence was commanding, yet there was a gentleness in the way she handled the animals that reflected the care she poured into everything she did. Jacob arrived shortly after, carrying a bundle of tools and a fresh sense of determination. Today, however, was not going to be an ordinary day. There were rumors of rustlers nearby, men who had been sneaking into ranches to steal cattle. The widow had received word from a neighboring rancher, and while she did not show fear, there was a tension in her posture that made even Jacob sit a little straighter. "Morning," she said, glancing at him with a small, controlled smile. "I hope you're ready. Today might be a test of more than just skill. It's about courage, too." The widow moved with precision, scanning every fence line and gate, while Jacob followed closely, learning not just how to spot a weak fence, but how to observe the land, notice unusual tracks, and anticipate problems before they happened. The sun climbed higher and the heat was strong, but neither of them slowed. They worked in quiet coordination, a rhythm developing between them that made the day's tasks seem easier, even in the face of uncertainty. By midday, they reached the far pasture where some of the cattle grazed. Jacob noticed something unusual, the tracks of more than one horse, leading toward the nearby woods. He called it to the widow's attention, pointing carefully. She studied the tracks for a long moment, her brow furrowing slightly. "You might be right," she said, her voice steady. "Looks like someone's been scouting this land. Could be rustlers. We need to be careful." He looked at the widow and saw no hesitation, only focus and determination. It gave him courage, and he realized that he could face whatever came with her by his side. The afternoon passed with more preparation. They reinforced gates, checked the barns, and ensured that every animal was secure. The widow taught Jacob how to move silently through the fields, how to observe without being noticed, and how to stay calm in tense situations. Her lessons were practical, but they were also life lessons, about confidence, about strength, and about trusting in oneself even when the outcome was uncertain. As the sun began to dip toward the horizon, a distant sound reached their ears, the faint clip-clop of horses. Jacob stiffened and the widow's eyes narrowed. She moved swiftly but quietly, signaling him to follow. They hid behind a row of tall bushes near the edge of the pasture, watching as a small group of men appeared on horseback. The rustlers had come, just as the widow had feared. Jacob felt a surge of fear, but he also felt something else, determination. He looked at the widow, who gave him a subtle nod. He understood. They would face this together. The widow stepped forward, her voice strong and commanding. "You won't take anything from this ranch," she called, her words carrying over the open field. The rustlers paused, surprised by the strength in her voice. Jacob followed her lead, moving with quiet confidence, ready to act if necessary. A tense standoff began. The rustlers assessed the situation, unsure if they had underestimated the widow. Jacob noticed her every movement, how she positioned herself, how she kept her voice steady, how her eyes never left theirs. He felt a mix of admiration and resolve. He knew he had to stay calm, to be steady like her, and to support her in any way he could. The standoff did not last long. The widow's confidence, combined with Jacob's quiet presence, seemed to unnerve the rustlers. They began to retreat, deciding that this ranch was not worth the risk. The widow watched them disappear into the distance, her posture relaxed but alert. Jacob exhaled, feeling a mixture of relief and pride. He had faced danger for the first time and had survived, not just because of his own actions, but because he had learned from the widow. After the rustlers were gone, they returned to the ranch house. The sun had set, leaving the sky painted in shades of purple and gold. The day had been exhausting, but it had also been a turning point. Jacob realized that he had grown in ways he hadn't expected. He had learned courage, patience, and the value of standing by someone he respected. The widow, too, felt a change. She had seen Jacob in action, seen his quiet strength and steady determination. She realized that her initial impressions of him, of a shy, reserved young man, had been only part of the truth. Beneath the quiet exterior lay a man who could be trusted, someone who could stand beside her through challenges, and perhaps even share more than just work and responsibilities. That evening, as they sat on the porch, watching the stars appear in the clear night sky, the widow spoke quietly. "You did well today, cowboy. You stayed calm, you stayed focused, and you didn't run when things got difficult. That's more than most men could do. Maybe you're not as shy as you look after all. Maybe you have more courage than you give yourself credit for." The widow's teasing smirk had softened into something more genuine, and Jacob felt the beginnings of an affection that he had not yet fully understood. For the rest of the evening, they moved through the ranch together, checking the animals and securing everything for the night. There was a quiet rhythm to their actions, a silent communication that spoke louder than words. Jacob realized that he was beginning to understand not just the ranch, but the widow herself, her strength, her independence, and the warmth beneath her commanding presence. As the night deepened, the ranch fell silent. The animals rested, the wind whispered through the trees, and the stars shone brightly above. Jacob sat outside the barn, thinking about the day, about the widow, and about the unusual growing connection between them. He realized that he cared for her in a way that was gentle, respectful, and new. The widow, standing by the porch and looking at the same stars, felt a similar stirring in her heart. She thought about Jacob's quiet strength, his patience, and his willingness to learn. She realized that her initial amusement at his shyness had grown into something deeper, an appreciation, a fondness, and perhaps the beginning of trust and affection that she had not allowed herself to feel since her husband's passing. In that quiet moment, under the vast, starlit sky, both of them understood that something significant had begun. Their bond had been tested by challenge, strengthened by courage, and deepened by mutual respect. They were no longer simply the widow and the shy cowboy. They were companions, allies, and something more, slowly and gently coming to life in their hearts. The days that followed promised more work, more challenges, and more shared moments. But for now, in the stillness of the night, they allowed themselves to feel the quiet satisfaction of having faced difficulty together, and the subtle thrill of realizing that their connection had grown beyond mere circumstance. The widow smirked softly, and Jacob returned the small, shy smile she had come to expect. It was a moment of understanding, a shared acknowledgement that they had faced the day together, and that this was only the beginning of a story that would grow stronger with every sunrise and sunset on the Dustwood Ranch. The morning sun broke over Dustwood, spilling golden light across the fields and ranch. The air was fresh with the scent of dew and wildflowers, and the soft rustle of leaves in the wind seemed almost like a gentle welcome to a new day. The ranch had settled into a quiet rhythm after the events of the previous days. Jacob had grown more confident in his work, and the widow Marlowe moved with the familiar grace and authority that had always commanded respect. Today, there was no immediate threat, no urgent chores beyond the ordinary. Yet, both Jacob and the widow felt a quiet tension, a sense that something had shifted between them. They had faced danger together, and that experience had drawn them closer in ways that neither had fully acknowledged yet. Jacob started the morning by tending to the horses, moving carefully among the stalls, brushing the animals and checking their feed. The widow observed him from the porch, her arms crossed and a small, approving smirk on her face. She watched him move with precision and care, noticing how his shyness had softened into a calm confidence. She realized that his quiet nature was not weakness, it was strength tempered with thoughtfulness. "You're getting better with the horses," she called out, her voice carrying across the barnyard. "They trust you more each day. You're starting to sound like you actually know what you're doing. Might get too confident for your own good." After finishing with the horses, Jacob moved on to check the fences along the far fields. The sun climbed higher, and the light danced on the grass, creating a golden haze over the ranch. The widow joined him, carrying a bundle of tools and moving with the same quiet confidence she always did. She walked beside him, not giving orders this time, but offering guidance and occasional words of advice. "You've learned to pay attention to the details," she said softly. "That's the difference between a good ranch hand and someone who can really manage this land. I wouldn't know half of this without your help." They repaired a section of fencing near the creek, fed the livestock, and prepared the fields for the coming season. With each shared task, their connection grew stronger, not in words, but in actions, glances, and the unspoken understanding that had begun to form between them. During a break, they sat on a large rock near the edge of the pasture, drinking from a shared jug of water. The air was warm, and a gentle breeze carried the scent of wildflowers and fresh grass. Jacob looked at the widow, noticing the way her hair glimmered in the sunlight and how her eyes, though sharp and commanding, held a softness when she looked at him. "You've changed this place," he said quietly. "Not just the ranch, but me too. I feel better here. Like I belong. And I care about you." Jacob shifted closer, and the widow did not pull away. The connection they had built through work, trust, and quiet companionship had finally reached a point where it could be acknowledged openly. Later that afternoon, they returned to the ranch house. The tasks of the day were complete, and the animals were settled for the night. The widow stood on the porch, looking out over the fields as the sun began to set, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink. Jacob joined her, standing close but giving her space, feeling the bond that had grown stronger with every passing day. "I've been thinking," Jacob said softly, breaking the silence, "about us, about what this could mean. I don't want to just be someone who works here. I want to be part of your life if you'll let me. Well, take me as yours, and I'll call you my partner." They stood together, side by side, the weight of their past struggles lifted by the promise of shared future. Over the following weeks, life at the ranch continued, but everything felt different. They worked side by side, not just as rancher and worker, but as companions who trusted and cared for each other. The widow's laughter became more frequent, and Jacob's confidence grew with every task he completed. Their bond was no longer quiet and unspoken. It was alive, acknowledged, and celebrated in small, meaningful ways. One evening, as the sun dipped low over the horizon, they stood at the edge of the fields, watching the golden light fade into twilight. The ranch was peaceful, the animals settled, and the world seemed still around them. Jacob took the widow's hand gently, and she did not pull away. Instead, she smiled, a mixture of pride, warmth, and affection in her eyes. "I never thought I'd find someone I could trust like this," she said softly. "Someone who respects me, works with me, and cares for me." "I never thought I'd find someone like you either," he replied. "Someone strong, kind, and amazing. I'm lucky to be here with you." The shy cowboy and the giant widow had grown together, facing challenges, learning from each other, and discovering a connection that neither had expected. As the stars began to appear in the night sky, they returned to the ranch house. The night was calm, filled with the gentle sounds of the animals and the whisper of the wind. Jacob and the widow sat together on the porch, sharing stories, laughter, and quiet companionship. There was no need for grand gestures. Everything had changed through shared experiences, trust, and the slow blossoming of affection. In Dustwood, under the wide-open skies, the ranch thrived not just because of hard work, but because of the partnership that had formed between them. The shy cowboy had found courage and confidence, and the giant widow had found someone to share her life with, someone who understood her strength and cared for her heart. Their story, once quiet and tentative, had grown into one of mutual respect, trust, and love. It was a story of growth, understanding, and the kind of connection that could withstand challenges and time. Together, they faced the future with hope and determination, knowing that whatever came their way, they would face it side by side. The widow smirked once more, a playful and confident expression that reflected her nature, and Jacob smiled back, no longer shy but confident in the bond they shared. Dustwood, the ranch, and their lives were forever changed, not by grand events alone, but by the small, meaningful moments that had brought them together. And so, their story continued, filled with work, laughter, shared dreams, and the quiet joy of knowing that they had found in each other a partnership that was strong, enduring, and true. In the heart of the Dustwood Ranch, a shy cowboy and a giant widow had discovered not only love but a life built together, hand in hand, under the endless skies.